Here we have a lovely sunset on a warm winter's evening. I'm going to show you a winter night sky as the sky changes during the year, and some of the constellations I want to show you aren't visible when the sun sets in summer. I'm going to speed the time up a bit so that the sun sets quickly. Keep an eye out for moving objects, and if you have any idea what they are, type it in the chat below. Did you see those dots moving very quickly? They were satellites, and the very big one was the International Space Station, and because it goes around the Earth every 90 minutes, you may have spotted it twice. Now that the sun has set, we can finally begin on our tour of the night sky. Please remember that your eyes can take up to 20 minutes to adjust to the dark, so if you do go looking for stars from your back garden, don't be disappointed if you don't see much straight away. You need to allow time for your eyes to adjust, and don't look at your phone or any other sources of light, as that will make it harder for you. We don't have to let our eyes adjust to the dark for this show, but you may notice some other things blocking our view. The first of these things is ground fog. This is common in the evenings as the night air condenses the moisture in the ground. Normally it isn't very high, so it shouldn't be much of a problem, but we can get rid of it on here. The next thing is the Earth's atmosphere. This gives the sky the blue colour that we see as the air contained within scatters the light. So I'm going to take that away too. And for the purposes of this show, I'm also going to take away the sun and the moon, just so they're not in the way. We're going to start with a constellation that I hope many, if not all of you, will recognise. Does anyone know what this constellation is? It might help if I link up the stars with some lines. These stars here make up one of the easiest to spot constellations. This is Orion. He appears in the winter night sky with his bow and his hunting dogs. I like Orion because he's one of the few constellations that actually looks like the character that he's named after. Greek mythology tells us that Orion was known as a great hunter. He was so good at hunting that his family never went hungry. In fact, he was so good at hunting that he was able to provide for everyone in his village, and not just his village, all the surrounding neighbourhoods as well. However, Orion was very boastful about his talents, and he decided to show everyone just how great he was by boasting that he could rid the earth of all the wild animals. This angered Gaia, the earth goddess. Her animals were precious to her, so she sent the only animal that she believed might have a chance against his bow and arrow. So she sent Scorpio, the giant scorpion, to try and stop him. Orion tried to battle the scorpion, but he quickly realised that his arrows were being defeated by the creature's armour. To avoid the scorpion, Orion jumped in the sea to escape. It was then that Apollo, the Greek god of the sun, pointed out to his twin sister Artemis a small black object in the sea. Claiming it was a horrible villain, he dared Artemis to shoot it with her bow and arrow. Artemis easily hit her target, but when she swam out to retrieve her victim, she discovered that the villain was actually her friend Orion. Artemis begged the gods to bring Orion back to life, but they refused, so instead she put Orion's picture in the sky so that she would always be able to see him. Unfortunately for poor Orion, he is being constantly chased around the night sky by his enemy, the giant scorpion. As the constellation of Orion sets in the east, the constellation of Scorpio can be seen rising from the west, forever chasing him around the night sky. Orion's a fabulous place to start looking at constellations, as there's so much going on. This star circled here is Betelgeuse. The name comes from the Arabic and basically means armpit of the giant. It's a type of star called a red supergiant, and it's around 700 times the size of our own sun. The colour and size of Betelgeuse tells scientists that it's close to the end of its life and will probably disappear in the next 10 to 100,000 years, which isn't very long for a star. At the opposite end of Orion, we have this bright white star called Rigel, circled here. The name also comes from the Arabic and means left leg of the giant. Rigel is a blue supergiant burning very brightly, around 47,000 times hotter than our own sun. Rigel's probably one of the brightest stars in our galaxy, but it's not as bright to us as some of the others, like Betelgeuse, simply because it's so much further away. I'd like you to write down the name Rigel on the piece of paper you have in front of you. I'll explain why at the end. So we have these two stars burning in very different colours and at opposite ends of their life cycles. because Betelgeuse is coming to an end and Rigel is quite a new, young, hot star. Orion's really easy to spot because of the 3 stars on his belt, and these stars forming his sword are where I want to take you next. Hidden in the sword of Orion is another fantastic object, the Orion Nebula. Does anyone know what a nebula is? Isn't it pretty? It looks quite a lot like a flower. A nebula is a vast cloud of gas and dust in space where young stars are formed from enormous gas giants like Jupiter. They come in many shapes and colours and are often named after the shapes that they form. Just up here on Orion's belt is another nebula. This one is called the Horsehead Nebula because it looks very much like a horse's head, albeit on its side. I mentioned that Orion appears in the sky with his hunting dogs. This is one of them, the constellation of Canis Major, or the Big Dog. The brightest star in the night sky is this one here, called Sirius. Sirius is not all that big, but it's really bright because it's relatively close to Earth. And it's what we call a binary star. That's one star orbiting another. I'd like you to write down Sirius on the piece of paper. Many of you will recognise the name Sirius from the Harry Potter books, as Harry's godfather was called Sirius Black, and he could change into a big black dog. Ancient mythology and astrology inspired many of J.K. Rowling's character names, so much so that you can probably do a Harry Potter tour of the night sky. And this little line up here represents Canis Minor, or the little dog. I know that the artwork here shows Orion with a club and an animal skin, but it's also said that he carries a bow and arrow, so I tend to think of him with an arrow raised in his hand above his head and his bow raised in the sky ready to shoot. But what animal do you think he might be facing? He's maybe getting ready to hunt. Can anyone guess what this animal is? This star here is the creature's eye, and it's a red giant called Aldebaran. I'd like you to write down Aldebaran on your paper as well. Aldebaran is the big red eye of Taurus, the bull. And within the constellation of Taurus is this group of stars here. They can be quite tricky to spot because they're quite faint. Sometimes it's easier to see it out of the corner of your eye in real life. This group of stars is called the Pleiades, or the Seven Sisters. That's because it's possible to pick out up to 7 stars with the naked eye, although, as you can see here, there's a lot more than 7. Greek mythology names the Pleiades as the 7 daughters of Atlas and Pleione, called Maia, Teargeti, Alcione, Selene, Sterope, Electra, and Merope. When their father, Atlas, was given the fate of carrying the heavens on his shoulders, Orion started pursuing the Pleiades. Zeus, the king of the gods, transformed them into stars to help them to evade Orion's advances. Constellations have different names in different countries. The Pleiades in Japan is called Subaru, which some of you may recognise as a brand of car. Subaru cars have stars on their badge. You'd think there would be 7 stars, but there's actually only 6 because the Japanese like to think that the 7th star is the car itself. This W-shaped constellation is Cassiopeia. It's named after the vain queen Cassiopeia, wife of King Cephas from Greek mythology. And she's pictured here reclining on her throne, looking at herself in the mirror. Cassiopeia liked to boast about her unrivaled beauty, once claiming that she was more beautiful than all of the Nereids, the 50 sea nymphs fathered by the Titan Nereus. They were so enraged by her comments that they appealed to Poseidon to punish Cassiopeia for her boastfulness. The sea god obliged and sent Cetus, a giant sea monster, to ravage the coast of Cephas's kingdom. Cephas turned to a wise man for help and was told that in order to appease Poseidon, he and Cassiopeia had to sacrifice their daughter Andromeda to the sea monster. Reluctantly, they did so, leaving poor Andromeda chained to a rock for the sea monster to find. However, she was saved at the very last minute by the Greek hero Perseus, who happened to be passing by, saw Andromeda, and rescued her from the monster. Perseus and Andromeda were later married, and they can both be found in the night sky, just below the constellation of Cassiopeia. This is Perseus, pictured here carrying the Medusa's head. In August every year, the Earth encounters a meteor shower in the location of the constellation of Perseus, called the Perseids. In fact, we only just passed the peak of this meteor shower last week, so if anyone saw any shooting stars, this is what it would have been. And if the sky clears up a bit, then you may still be able to see one or two shooting stars after dark. Andromeda, however, isn't a constellation, but actually our closest neighbouring galaxy, which is clearly visible with the naked eye. We have to travel to the opposite side of the sky for this next one. This group of stars is not only easy to spot because of its shape, but it's also visible all year round. These stars only form part of the full constellation, but unusually these stars have their own name, which I'm sure nearly all of you will recognise. This is the Plough, sometimes called the Big Dipper or the Saucepan. The Plough is just part of a larger constellation called Ursa Major, or the Great Bear. It's important to us because it's visible all year round and helps us to find one star in particular, the North Star. The North Star, called Polaris, can be used for directions because it sits directly above the North Pole. It's easy to find because if you draw a line between the sides of the saucepan, the opposite end to the handle, and draw a line through them all the way up through the sky, you can see here that it leads you directly to the tail of the Little Bear, or Ursa Minor, and this is where we can find Polaris, or the North Star. At present, the star known as Polaris is the North Star. However, Polaris has not always been and will not always be the North Star. This is because the Earth has a slightly off-centre or wobbly axis. Right now, the Earth's rotational axis happens to be pointing almost exactly at Polaris. But in the year 3000 BC, the North Star was a star called Thuban, also known as Alpha Draconis. And in about 13,000 years from now, the precession of the rotation will mean that the bright star Vega will become the North Star. But don't feel bad for Polaris, because in 26,000 more years, it will once again become the pole star. Because it lies almost in a direct line above the North Pole, it has one special feature, which I hope you can see here. It appears to be completely motionless whilst all the other stars in the sky appear to revolve around it. That concludes this short trip around the night sky. If you have any questions at all, please ask them using the Q&A function below. And whilst you're thinking of your questions, I'd like to show you a very short video showing you the scale of some of the stars that we've looked at today. Please look out for those stars that you wrote on your list and see how big they are compared to our own sun. I didn't create this video, so please excuse the ominous music and the words at the very end, but I still think it's worth a watch.